The stagecoach wheezed to a halt in the Montana dust, and Clara Danner stepped down into a street that measured people in glances. She was used to it, the way strangers' eyes would climb from her boots to her hat brim and still have inches to go. Tall, tall, too much. She'd heard it all before. She stood straight anyway, back unbent, and crossed the street. The dust swirled around her hem. She'd learned to carry her own trunk a long time ago. She set it down on the boardwalk in front of the Harrow residence, jaw set, breath easy. The door opened before she could even knock. A woman, Mrs. Harrow, looked her up and down. Surprise flickered in her eyes, then soured into something else. Something rehearsed. "You're Miss Danner." "Yes, ma'am." "You're—" "Very tall." Clara waited. This part always came next. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Mrs. Harrow said, her hand smoothing an apron that didn't have a single wrinkle. "We've already filled the post." "But your letter—" "I'm sorry." The door closed. The latch clicked. A period at the end of a sentence she'd been forced to read her whole life. Clara didn't plead. She just stood there, spine straight, while the world moved on around her. Her trunk sat on the boardwalk like it refused to be embarrassed on her behalf. Then a voice cut through the noise, low and sure. "You looking for somewhere to stay?" A man walked toward her. He had the kind of quiet that settled a space. Dust on his boots, work cut into his forearms. A sun-bleached hat was pushed back so his green eyes could meet hers without squinting. He wasn't quite her height, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. "Name's Thomas Sutton," he said. "Got a cabin up on the ridge. Spare room's clean. It's a ride, but it's warm." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Why offer that to a stranger?" He lifted one shoulder, a simple, honest movement. "Because I watched her turn you out for no decent reason. And where I come from, you don't leave a woman standing in the street with a trunk and the light going." She studied his face, looking for the angles she'd learned to avoid. The smirk that meant a bargain would be named later. The pity that expected obedience in return. She found neither. There was just stillness. "I can carry my own trunk," she said, her voice firm. "I know," Thomas said, already reaching for it. He lifted it without any show, just muscle meeting weight. He nodded toward two horses tied up nearby. "You ride?" They rode without talking. The trail climbed into cooler air, the shade of the pines closing in around them like guardians. When the cabin finally appeared, it was a simple, tight-jointed thing tucked beneath the trees. It looked like a place that kept its promises, but as they got closer, something felt off. The axe by the woodpile was clean, too clean. The windows had no dust on them. This wasn't a home. It was a place someone was hiding. Thomas opened the door. "Pumps out back if you want to wash up. Stew's on the stove. No need to earn it." Clara hesitated at the threshold. "You're not expecting anything in return?" His eyes were steady, a deep, unnerving green. "No, ma'am. You sleep safe under my roof or not at all. The choice is yours." She stepped inside. The cabin was even stranger from the inside. It was plain, yes, but it was empty in a way that had nothing to do with poverty. A small stove, a table, two chairs, a shelf with two tin cups and a single blue plate. It was less a home and more a stage, set for a play with only one actor. Thomas set her trunk down, tossed some wood in the fire, and ladled stew into a bowl. He didn't ask where she came from. He didn't ask why she was there. He just set the bowl on the table with a heel of bread. The stew shocked her with its kindness. Simple beef, carrots, salt, heat. She hadn't realized how long she'd been holding her breath until it all came rushing out. She helped him with the dishes, a shared, silent movement that made the room feel a little less like a hiding place. When she was done, she turned to him, meeting his gaze across the small table. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," he answered. But as dusk settled, Clara couldn't shake the feeling. This man was a ghost. This cabin was a shell. She was safe for now, but she had a feeling she'd just stepped into a story much bigger and more dangerous than a simple rejection at a stranger's door. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, and the silence inside was deafening. She got up, needing to move, to feel the floorboards under her feet. In the corner, near the hearth, sat Thomas's saddlebags. He was a simple rancher, he said. But simple ranchers didn't have saddlebags made of fine, city-stitched leather. Her hand trembled as she reached out. She unbuckled a strap. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a book. Not a Bible or a ledger. It was a book of poetry. And on the inside cover, in elegant script, was a name. It wasn't Thomas Sutton. The name was Thomas Alastair Blackwood. The next morning, Clara was up before the sun. She hefted the axe and split a log with a clean, sharp crack that echoed in the cold air. When Thomas came out from the cabin, she didn't look at him. She just set another log upright. "You've done ranch work before," he said. It wasn't a question. "I can learn," she answered, her voice tight. She wouldn't let him see her fear. She wouldn't let him know she knew he was a liar. He just nodded. That was his way. No praise, no surprise. Just quiet acknowledgement. They worked side by side all day, fixing fences, feeding the stock. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't comfortable. It was heavy with unspoken questions. She watched his hands. They were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked the land. But she kept picturing that name in the book. Thomas Alastair Blackwood. It sounded like money. It sounded like trouble. Late that afternoon, she caught him watching her. His gaze was intense, calculating. He wasn't just seeing a hard worker. He was measuring her, testing her, and she had no idea if she was passing or failing. That evening, they sat on the porch. The sun bled across the horizon. "I was engaged once," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "He called it off. Said he couldn't stand the way I made him feel small." Thomas turned to her, his jaw set. "Then he was the one who was small." The words hit her like a physical blow. Clean and true. For the first time she thought maybe, just maybe, it wasn't her fault. But then she looked at him, this man of secrets, and wondered what lies he told himself. Just as the last light faded, she saw it. A flicker of movement on the far ridge. Then another. Two riders, silhouetted against the dying sun. They weren't moving. They were just watching the cabin. Watching them. Thomas saw them too. He didn't tense up. He didn't move a muscle. He just went very, very still. The quiet rancher disappeared, and in his place was someone else. Someone dangerous. "Get inside," he said, his voice a low command. The riders on the ridge changed everything. The cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a fortress under siege. Thomas moved with a quiet, deadly precision. He bolted the door. He took a rifle down from above the mantel. He laid out shells in a neat, perfect line on the table. He wasn't just a rancher. He was a soldier. Clara watched him, her heart pounding. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of the world that had made him this way. She filled the lamps, trimmed the wicks, her hands steady. She wouldn't be a liability. She would be a partner. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the tense silence. He looked at her, his green eyes dark with things he wouldn't say. Trouble. That was all he gave her. But it was enough. They sat in the dark, waiting. The wind pressed against the shutters. Every creak of the cabin walls was a footstep. Every gust of wind was a whisper. Hours passed. Then came a knock. Low and firm, not the knock of a friend. Thomas was on his feet in an instant, the rifle in his hands, aimed at the door. "Name yourself," he called out, his voice iron. A rough, weathered voice came through the wood. "Elias Traeger." Thomas hesitated. Clara could see the conflict on his face. He knew the name. He slid the bolt. An old man stepped inside, his face a roadmap of hard years. He took off his hat, his eyes darting from Thomas to Clara and back again. "Came back 'cause I thought you ought to know," Traeger said. "I saw their camp. 3 men. Not trappers. They've got rifles and they're too close." Thomas's jaw tightened. "How close?" "Half a mile. They're watching you." Silence. The 3 of them stood in the flickering lantern light, a triangle of secrets and fear. Then Thomas nodded once. "Then we'll let them see this place isn't unguarded." They divided the night into watches. Traeger took the barn. Thomas sat on the porch, his rifle across his knees. Clara kept watch at the window, the lamp turned down low. She didn't flinch from the darkness. Some time before dawn, Thomas came back inside. He looked at her standing there, a tall shadow in the dark. "You're not scared," he said. "I've been scared my whole life," she replied. "This is just a different kind of quiet." He finally gave her a piece of the truth, a small, sharp piece. "They're not after the land, they're after me." He said his name was Thomas Sutton. He said he'd bought this land fair and square, but that there were men, powerful men back east, who claimed he'd stolen it from them. He said it was a lie, but that they had money and influence, and they'd sent men to run him off. It was a good story, plausible, but Clara knew it was a lie, because she'd seen the name in the book. Morning broke, cold and clear. The ridge was empty. The men were gone. But the unease remained, a poison in the air. The threat had passed, for now. But Clara knew it wasn't over. She was trapped in this cabin with a liar, surrounded by enemies she couldn't see. And the worst part, she was starting to believe his lies were the only thing keeping her safe. The next day, Elias Traeger was gone. He'd slipped away before sunrise, as mysteriously as he'd arrived. The reprieve from danger didn't make them relax. It made them work harder. They moved with a shared, frantic purpose. They barred the barn with a second, thicker door. They reset fence posts, their hands raw from the cold and the work. Every hammer blow was a defiance. Every tightened rail was a claim. "This is our land. We will not be moved." In the middle of the work, Thomas stopped. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw honesty she hadn't seen before. "You're not just strong," he said. "You're steady. I needed that. I just never knew it." The old ache in her chest, the one that came from being told she was too much, began to dissolve. Here, with this man of secrets, in this place of danger, she was finally enough. That evening, the quiet in the cabin was different. It was warm. The fire crackled. Thomas stepped closer to her. He didn't speak. He just lifted a hand to her cheek. She leaned into his touch, and when he kissed her, it was with the certainty of stone setting into place. It wasn't just passion. It was a promise, a vow to build something that would last. But as she kissed him back, a cold thought slithered into her mind. Was this real? Or was this just another part of his story? Was he building a life with her, or was he just building a better defense? A week later, they rode into town for supplies. Clara's height drew the usual stares, the whispers, the smirks. She felt the old heat rise in her cheeks. But this time, Thomas was at her side. He didn't say anything. He didn't challenge anyone. He just stood close, his shoulder brushing hers, a silent, unshakable wall. His presence didn't stop the stares, but it changed them. It made her feel seen, not scrutinized. On the ride home, he broke the silence. "You ever think about building something lasting here? A real home?" The words settled in her chest like a seed. A home, not a cabin to hide in, not a roof to borrow. A place of her own. A place built not out of obligation, but out of choice. "Then let's build it," she said. That night, the dream of a real home felt possible, but the next morning it all came crashing down. A rider came up the trail. Not Traeger, not one of the men from the ridge. This man wore a fine suit, caked in dust. He looked like a city lawyer, and he had a piece of paper in his hand. "Thomas Alistair Blackwood?" the man called out. Thomas froze. The color drained from his face. The lie was over. "I represent the Blackwood family estate," the lawyer said, his voice dripping with condescension. "They've sent me with a final offer. Abandon this ridiculous claim on this worthless piece of land, return to New York, and they will be lenient." Clara stared at Thomas. Blackwood. She knew it. "And if I refuse?" Thomas asked, his voice dangerously low. The lawyer smiled, a cold, thin line. "Then they will have you declared mentally incompetent. They have doctors who will testify. They will say your grief over your brother's death has unhinged you. They will take the land. They will take your freedom. You will spend the rest of your life in an asylum." Thomas's hand went to the rifle that was always near. "I wouldn't," the lawyer warned. "My associates are waiting just down the trail. Any trouble and they have instructions." He looked past Thomas, his eyes landing on Clara for the first time. He smirked. "And they'll start with your oversized companion." The threat hung in the air, sickening and real. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The lawyer's face was familiar. She'd seen him before, in a photograph, on the mantle of the man she was once supposed to marry. He was her ex-fiancé's brother. It was all a trap from the very beginning. The job with the Harrows, the rejection, her being stranded in that dusty street. It was all a setup. "You," she whispered, the single word filled with a universe of betrayal. The lawyer's smirk widened. "Mr. Blackwood's family is very thorough. They learned he had a weakness for strays. And my brother, well, he owed me a favor. He told me all about you. The tall, lonely woman no one wanted. The perfect bait. The truth was a physical blow. Her deepest wound, the thing she was most ashamed of, had been used as a weapon against a man she was just beginning to trust. They hadn't just used her. They had orchestrated her humiliation." Thomas looked at her, his face a mask of fury and shame. "Clara, Don't," she cut him off. Her pain was too raw for apologies. She looked at the lawyer, her ex-fiancé's brother, the man who represented everything that had ever tried to make her feel small. And in that moment, something inside her snapped. The years of holding her breath, of shrinking herself down, of accepting the world's small verdict, it was all over. She took a step forward and then another, until she was towering over the city man. He took an involuntary step back, his smirk faltering. "You came all this way," she said, her voice low and rumbling, like thunder gathering in the mountains. "You should have sent more men." The lawyer's men were clumsy, city thugs who thought rifles made them strong. They didn't count on Thomas, who moved with the deadly grace of a panther. And they certainly didn't count on Clara. The first man who tried to rush the cabin met a swing from a cast-iron skillet that sent him sprawling in the dirt, dazed and confused. Clara stood in the doorway, a giantess, a fury, and the men hesitated. That hesitation cost them. Thomas used the moment to drop two of them with well-aimed shots, not to kill, but to cripple. The lawyer screamed, a pathetic high-pitched sound, and scrambled back toward his horse. But Clara was faster. She cleared the porch in two long strides, grabbing the back of his fine suit coat and lifting him off his feet like a sack of flour. "Let's talk," she said, her voice calm in the sudden silence. He spilled everything. His name was Arthur Vance. His brother, Clara's ex-fiancé, had been ruined by bad investments. The Blackwood family had offered to save him in exchange for his help. They knew Thomas, or Blackwood, had run away to Montana after his brother died. They wanted him back, but more than that, they wanted the land. Why? Thomas demanded, pressing the barrel of his rifle into Vance's chest. It's just rock and timber. No, Vance stammered, his eyes wide with terror. It's not. Your father discovered it years ago. There's silver in these hills, a fortune's worth. He left the land to you in an ironclad will, thinking you were the only one he could trust not to tear it apart for greed. The pieces clicked into place. Thomas's grief, his family's cruelty, her own heartbreak. It was all tied together by greed, a river of silver running right under their feet. Suddenly a shot rang out from the trees, not from Thomas's rifle. Vance crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The last of the thugs, hidden in the woods, was trying to silence him. Before Thomas could react, another shot answered from the ridge. The thug in the trees cried out and fell silent. And then a figure on horseback emerged from the pines. It was Elias Traeger. "Reckon you folks could use a hand," the old man said, his rifle smoking. He wasn't just a wandering cattleman. He was a guardian. "Who are you?" Clara asked. "A friend of your father's," Traeger said, looking at Thomas. "He asked me to keep an eye on you. Knew your family would come sniffing around sooner or later. Just didn't count on them being this stupid." The immediate threat was over. Vance was gone, his men either wounded or fled. But the war was just beginning. The Blackwood family knew where Thomas was, and they knew what the land was worth. They wouldn't give up. "They'll send more men," Thomas said, his voice heavy. "Professionals next time." "Let 'em come," Traeger said, dismounting. "This land is worth fighting for." Clara looked from the old man to Thomas. She looked at the cabin, her temporary home. She looked at the ridge where the silver lay sleeping. She had been brought here as a pawn in their game, a tool to be used and discarded. They had underestimated her. They had counted on her being weak, broken, and lonely. They had been wrong. "This isn't just your land anymore, Thomas," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she never knew she possessed. "They made me a part of this. Now it's our land." Thomas looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time he smiled. Not a faint, sad smile, a real one. "All right, Clara Danner," he said. "Let's show them what happens when they pick a fight with us." They buried Vance in a shallow, unmarked grave. There was no ceremony. Justice, Clara thought, was sometimes just dirt and silence. They spent the next week turning the cabin into a fortress. Under Traeger's guidance, they dug trenches, reinforced the walls, and set up a perimeter. Clara's strength was no longer just for chores. It was a strategic advantage. She moved logs that two men would struggle with, building barricades with a steady, determined rhythm. Thomas watched her, a look of awe on his face. He'd seen her as steady. Now he saw her as a force of nature. One night, sitting by the fire, he finally told her the whole truth. His older brother, the only person in his family he'd loved, had died in a riding accident. The family, obsessed with appearances, had tried to cover it up, to pretend their grief wasn't messy. Thomas couldn't stand it. He walked away from the money, the name, everything. He came west to find something real. "I didn't mean to lie to you," he said, his voice raw. "Sutton was my mother's name. It felt more honest than Blackwood." "You found something real, Thomas," she said, her hand finding his in the dark. "And now we have to fight for it." The fight came sooner than they expected. A full dozen men, led by a cold-eyed man named Corrigan, who Traeger identified as one of the most ruthless guns for hire in the territory. They didn't bother with threats this time. They just started shooting. The siege lasted for 3 days. 3 days of gunfire, fear, and grim determination. Traeger was a master tactician, anticipating their moves, forcing them into mistakes. Thomas fought with a cold fury, protecting the home he had built. But it was Clara who turned the tide. On the third night, under the cover of a thunderstorm, Corrigan's men made their move. They breached the barn. Thomas and Traeger were pinned down in the cabin. It was Clara, hidden in the hayloft with a pitchfork, who held them off. She was a terrifying shadow in the dark, her height giving her an impossible reach. She moved with a ferocity born of a lifetime of being underestimated. When it was over, 2 of Corrigan's men were unconscious, and the rest had fled back into the storm, spooked by the she-devil in the barn. They had won the battle, but Corrigan was still out there. The next morning, Thomas found a note pinned to the new barn door. It was simple: the woman or the deed. Your choice. They were trying to break them apart, to use his feelings for her as a weapon. He showed her the note. Her face was grim. "He thinks you'll trade the land for me," she said. "He's wrong," Thomas said, his voice like flint. "I'm not trading anything. I'm keeping both." They had a new plan, not to defend, to attack. Clara had an idea. It was crazy, it was dangerous, and it was brilliant. She knew the land now. She knew its contours, its secrets. She'd spent weeks riding the fence lines. She proposed a trap, using the very silver mine the Blackwoods were after as bait. Traeger grinned. "The boy's father would have liked you," he said. "You think like a general." They sent a message back with one of the wounded men they'd captured. A faked deal. Thomas would sign over the deed in exchange for Clara's safe passage east. The meeting point, the old abandoned mine shaft on the south ridge. Corrigan took the bait. He arrived with his remaining men, confident, arrogant. He saw Thomas standing alone at the mouth of the mine. He saw the deed in his hand. He didn't see Clara and Traeger hidden in the rocks above. When the ambush was sprung, it was swift and brutal. Traeger's rifle picked off the sentries, and Clara started an avalanche. Using her strength, she dislodged a series of boulders they had spent all day positioning. Rocks and dirt rained down, sealing the entrance to the mine, trapping half of Corrigan's men inside. The rest surrendered. Corrigan, caught in the open, threw down his guns. It was over. In the aftermath, standing in the dust and silence, Thomas looked at Clara. "They sent you here to be the bait in their trap," he said, "and you ended up being the architect of theirs." He walked over to Corrigan, who was bound and kneeling on the ground. He took the deed from the man's pocket. Then he tore it into a dozen pieces and let the wind carry them away. "The land was never for sale," he said. With Corrigan and his men handed over to the territorial marshal, a fragile peace settled over the ridge. Elias Traeger tipped his hat one morning and rode off, his promise to Thomas's father fulfilled. "You ever need me, you know where to find me," he said. And then he was gone. Clara and Thomas were alone. They stood on the porch of the bullet-scarred cabin and looked out at their land, their home. "Thomas Blackwood," she said, testing the name. "I prefer Sutton," he said. "Blackwood is the name of the man who ran. Sutton is the name of the man who stayed." He took her hand. "Come with me." He took her not to the ridge to plan a house, but back into town. They walked past the Harrow residence, its curtains drawn in shame. They walked past the staring townspeople, whose glances were now filled with awe instead of judgment. They walked straight into the land office. He placed a fresh claim on the table. He dipped the pen in ink and wrote his name. Thomas Sutton. Then he pushed the paper and the pen to her. She looked at him, her eyes shining. She wrote her name next to his. Clara Danner. Partners. In truth, not in shadow. When they stepped back out into the sun, the world felt different. The weight she had carried her whole life, the weight of being too much, was gone. She stood tall, her hand in his, and she had never felt more perfectly sized for the world she was in. They didn't build a new house right away. They rebuilt the cabin, patching the bullet holes, strengthening the walls. Every fixed board, every new nail was a testament to their survival. They made the scars part of their home, a reminder of what they had fought for. One evening he presented her with a ring, not gold or silver, but carved from the heartwood of 100-year-old pine from their land. It was simple, it was steady, it was perfect. She was no longer a stranger in a strange land. She was a queen in her own kingdom, a fortress of a woman who had found a home worth defending, and a man strong enough to stand beside her. The whispers in town had not stopped, but now they spoke of the tall woman of Sutton Ridge not with pity, but with respect. She had faced down gunmen and won. She had claimed her place in a world that tried to deny her one. And as the first winter snow began to fall, blanketing the land in a quiet peace, she knew this was just the beginning. The silver in the hills could wait. They had found a treasure far more valuable. They had found each other. If you believe everyone deserves to find a place where they belong, hit that subscribe button and join our community. And let us know in the comments, what was the moment you knew Clara was going to win?